Blood dripped from Thyra's hands as she held the deformed newborn against her chest, her wild eyes meeting those of the small being she had just brought into the world. "It is him," she whispered, recognizing the monster from her visions. Around her, the bodies of the warriors who had tried to stop her lay in the snow, the axe still firmly grasped in her left hand. It was too late to prevent what the gods had foretold. Thank you for joining this journey into the shadowed corners of Viking lore. This channel is just beginning, and every single subscription helps keep this project alive as we strive to reach our first 1,000 followers. If you find yourself drawn to these tales of ancient struggles and haunting prophecies, please consider subscribing. Also, share in the comments the city you're watching from. I'd love to know where these stories are being heard. Your support means more than words can say. The dawn crept slowly over the frozen horizon, casting pale light through the skeletal branches of the ancient pines that stood sentinel around the village of Kattegat. A biting wind whispered through the forest's edge, carrying the scent of cold earth and pine resin frozen in ice. The snow lay thick and unbroken in most places, muffling the sounds of life stirring beneath its weight. Only the faint crunch of footsteps disturbed the silence, and a single figure moved with purpose along the narrow path that wove between the trees and toward the settlement's edge. Thyra Ravsdottir's breath came out in steady puffs, swirling as mist before fading into the morning air. Her dark hair, braided tightly with strands of silver thread, brushed against the heavy wool of her cloak, the blue fabric embroidered with ancient runes shimmering faintly in the weak sun. Her hands, scarred and calloused from years of ritual work, gripped the leather-bound satchel at her side, its weight a constant reminder of the responsibility she bore. 32 winters had carved lines of experience into her face, but her emerald eyes, deep and piercing, held a clarity and fire that belied her age. She was not merely a woman of the village. She was the priestess of Freya, chosen by the gods to serve as a bridge between the mortal world and the divine. Yet, in recent moons, that sacred role had become a curse. The villagers' whispers trailed behind her like shadows, heavy with suspicion and fear. She had predicted the birth of a child unlike any the world had seen, a child that would bring ruin, and the weight of that prophecy pressed upon her like the thickest winter frost. The village lay just beyond the last ring of trees, a cluster of wooden huts huddled close as though seeking warmth from each other's presence. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, promising hearths alight within, but the usual bustle of morning activity was subdued. Hunger and cold had gnawed at the people for months, sapping their spirits and fraying their bonds. The fields lay barren beneath the snow, and the stored food dwindled with each passing day. As Thyra stepped into the clearing, the biting wind shifted suddenly, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent that caught her off guard. Her gaze flicked toward the village center, where a small group of men stood clustered around a fire pit, their faces grim beneath fur-lined hoods. Among them, the figure of Jarl Gunnar Haraldsson towered, his gray eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for an unseen threat. The weight of his gaze met hers across the distance, cold and unyielding. He had forbidden her from speaking of what she had seen, fearing that her words would unravel the fragile threads holding the village together. Thyra's footsteps slowed, her mind heavy with the knowledge she carried. She remembered the exact moment, just days past, when the first vision had come to her, a dark, roaring shadow sweeping across the land, swallowing light and hope alike. In that vision, a child was born beneath a blood-red moon, its eyes black as the void, its touch bringing madness and despair. The gods had shown her this future again and again, each time more vivid, more certain. The weight of the amulet hung heavily against her chest, a carved wooden figure of Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and war. Thyra had prayed to her for guidance, for mercy, but the goddess's silence had only deepened the priestess's dread. Freya's favor had once been a beacon of hope. Now it was a cruel reminder of what was to come. She moved toward the edge of the village, where the huts gave way to a narrow strip of frozen earth. The cold bit into her skin beneath her gloves, but she welcomed the sharpness. It grounded her, tethered her to the mortal coil even as her mind drifted toward the spirit world. The forest here was ancient and sacred, a place where the veil between worlds thinned. Moss-covered stones marked the spots where her ancestors had communed with the gods, and the air was thick with the scent of pine, earth, and old magic. A sudden rustling in the underbrush made her pause. Her hand instinctively moved to the hilt of her dagger, its runes etched deep into the steel gleaming faintly in the pale light. From the shadows emerged a small figure, Leif Gunson, the village's aged blacksmith. His white hair hung in tangled strands, and his face was a map of lines carved by time and toil. The blue in his eyes, sharp and clear despite his years, met hers with quiet understanding. "Thyra," he whispered, his voice gravelly but steady. "The winds carry ill tidings, and your burden grows heavier each day." She nodded, her fingers tightening around the satchel strap. "The gods have shown me what is to come. The child of Sigrid will be born soon, but it is no child of light. She carries a darkness that will not be contained." Leif's gaze darkened, and he lowered his head in solemn acknowledgement. "I have seen the fear in the eyes of the warriors. Bjorn's wrath grows, and with it, the village's distrust of you." Thyra's lips tightened. They do not understand. They cannot see beyond their fears. Yet this is the truth. The path we walk leads to ruin unless the gods intervene. Leif placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "You walk a lonely road, Priestess, but you are not without allies. Remember, the gods speak in riddles and half-truths. Sometimes what we believe is doom may be a warning, a chance to change the course." She looked into his eyes, searching for hope. "If only the others could hear you. Without the Jarl's blessing, my voice is but a whisper lost in the storm." He nodded slowly. "Then you must choose your moments carefully. The village's survival depends on it." The sound of distant voices pulled their attention back toward the village. The morning was awakening fully now, though unease hung in the air like a thick fog. Thyra's gaze drifted to the narrow path leading to Sigrid's hut at the village's edge. The young woman's silhouette was barely visible through the frost-laden window panes, a fragile figure weighed down by her swollen belly. Sigrid Ingrid's daughter was barely more than a girl, but the hardships of life had pressed years onto her shoulders. Her golden hair was usually bright and full, but now it hung dull and limp, strands escaping the rough braid that framed her pale face. Thyra's heart clenched at the sight. The girl's eyes, usually downcast and submissive, flicked nervously toward the door as if sensing an unseen menace. The village had long whispered tales about Sigrid and Bjorn, how the warrior's cruelty had cast a shadow over their home, and how the girl bore the brunt of his rage. Thyra had seen the bruises hidden beneath Sigrid's woolen dress, the tremors in her hands when Bjorn's name was spoken. It was a story too familiar in these hard lands, but now woven with threads of dread no one dared to unravel. As the sun rose higher, the village came to life. Men sharpening axes, women tending fires, children huddled close to their mothers. Yet despite the routines, an undercurrent of tension rippled beneath the surface. Thyra could feel it in the air. The collective breath held, waiting for a storm that no one could name, but all sensed was coming. She traced her fingers over the silver rings adorning her hand, runes etched by her own hand, each symbol a prayer for protection and clarity. Her thoughts returned to the visions that had haunted her nights. The child with skin like frost-bitten ice, eyes black as the deepest pits of the underworld, fingers that curled like claws. A monster born of shadow and silence, yet not wholly what she had feared. Her role as priestess had always been to guide, to warn, to heal. But now, the weight of prophecy threatened to shatter her spirit. Each inside, Sigrid moved unsteadily, clutching the edge of the wooden table as another wave of pain radiated through her body. Her breaths were shallow and quick, her blue eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The midwives hovered nearby, their faces drawn and pale, whispering prayers to the old gods while offering quiet comfort. Thyra paused at the threshold, studying the scene before her. She saw not just the physical struggle of childbirth, but the fragile thread upon which the fate of Kattegat now balanced. The child within Sigrid was more than flesh and bone. It was a storm waiting to break, a darkness waiting to consume. Outside, the village held its breath, unaware that the night would soon bring with it a shadow deeper than winter's chill. In those early hours, beneath the watchful gaze of the cold moon and the silent trees, the threads of destiny began to unravel, and the priestess stood at the center, torn between her duty to the gods and the love she still carried for her people. The wind had shifted again, carrying a chill that bit deeper into the bones, as if the very air itself mourned what was unfolding beneath the frozen sky. Thyra stood just beyond the flickering shadows cast by the firelight near the edge of the village, her breath suspended in the cold night. The village was quiet now, hushed beneath a blanket of snow and fear, but within the walls of Sigrid's hut, a different kind of silence pressed down, a silence pregnant with suffering and unknown horror. Her hands trembled slightly, the weight of the night pressing upon her like a stone. The heavy fabric of her cloak felt suddenly too thick, suffocating, as she wrestled with the vision that had haunted her for moons. The child she was meant to confront. That child, whose birth had been foreseen as a harbinger of devastation. Yet now, standing on the precipice, she found herself caught in the tangled web of dread and doubt. The door of the hut creaked open just enough to catch a faint sliver of warm light, and a soft cry slipped through, fragile, yet laced with something unnatural. Thyra's heart clenched. The sound was not a cry of joy or innocent life, but something colder, sharper. A warning whispered on the wind. The midwives' faces had been etched with fear earlier, but that fear had deepened into something darker. The villagers dared not speak it aloud, but the truth was carved into the air like frost on glass. This birth was unlike any other. Thyra hesitated. Every instinct screamed for her to turn away, to retreat into the shadows and leave the unfolding nightmare to the villagers who wished her silence. Yet, beneath the layers of fear and suspicion, a stronger impulse stirred, a duty that had been drilled into her since the first breath she took as a priestess of Freya. She was the bridge between worlds, the shield against darkness. To abandon the child, no matter how monstrous, would be to betray everything she was. She moved closer, her footsteps muffled by the snow, each step a battle against the gnawing dread in her chest. The bitter wind whispered through the bare branches, carrying fragments of distant voices, whispers of curses and prayers, of hope and despair. Thyra's fingers brushed against the silver rings that adorned her hand. The runes engraved their pulsed faintly beneath her skin, a subtle reminder of the power she wielded and the responsibility she bore. The door opened wider suddenly, and light spilled out, burning through the darkness like a blade. Sigrid appeared, pale and trembling, clutching the doorway as if it were the last anchor to the world she knew. Her swollen belly heaved with pain, sweat glistening on her troubled brow. Eyes wide and wild, she looked at Thyra with a mixture of fear and pleading. "Please," Sigrid whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me before it's too late." Thyra's breath caught. The woman, so fragile and broken beneath the weight of her torment, was no longer the defiant figure she had seen earlier. The harsh words, the rejection, they all melted away, replaced by raw vulnerability. The child within was suffering, something unnatural and terrible writhing just beneath the surface of life. The priestess stepped inside, the warmth of the hearth washing over her like a fragile promise. The midwives stood aside, their faces a mask of dread, their hands trembling as they clutched cloths and herbs. They did not question Thyra's presence now, the unspoken truth binding them in fear and necessity. As she approached Sigrid's side, Thyra's eyes met the woman's once more. "I will be with you," she promised, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside. "No matter what comes." The hours that followed were a brutal tug of war between life and death. Sigrid's screams echoed through the night, a raw, desperate sound that seemed to claw at every shadow in the village. Thyra stayed close, her hands steady despite the chill that ran through her veins. Her whispered prayers were a fragile thread connecting them to the gods, Freya's mercy, Thor's strength, Odin's wisdom. But as the birth drew near, a new terror took hold. The child's cries were not like those of any newborn. They were cold, hollow, a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of some forgotten abyss. Thyra's heart pounded fiercely against her ribs as the final moment approached, fear and determination warring within her. When the child finally came into the world, wrapped in blood and shadow, the midwives recoiled in horror. The infant's skin was an unnatural shade of blue, cold as the ice that blanketed the land. Its eyes were black, bottomless pits that swallowed the light, and its fingers curled like the talons of some ancient beast. Thyra reached out instinctively, her hands trembling as they cradled the fragile, unnatural form. Despite the whispered curses and fearful glances, something in the child's gaze held her, an unsettling awareness that pierced through the veil of innocence. For a moment, time seemed to still. The village, the gods, the very earth itself held its breath. And then, a voice, ancient and low, rumbled from the infant's mouth, shattering the silence. "You see only the surface," it said, its tone both a warning and a revelation. "I am not the monster you fear. I am the messenger of what is to come." Thyra recoiled, her mind reeling. The prophecy had been only part of the truth. There was a deeper darkness waiting to unfurl, one that she had not yet glimpsed. A force that would not be stopped by fear or steel. In that moment, the fragile boundary between protector and destroyer blurred. Thyra knew her decision had sealed the fate of the village, but the weight of what was to follow pressed down on her like the coldest winter night. Her eyes, once burning with conviction, now reflected a harrowing emptiness, a soul touched by the shadows she had sought to contain. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, illuminating the frozen stones where ancient rites were performed, the child nestled in her arms remained silent, watching the world awaken with eyes darker than the void. The forest embraced Thyra like a shroud as she moved cautiously beneath the skeletal limbs of ancient pines. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting ghostly patterns upon the snow-covered ground, each step muffled by the cold blanket that smothered the world. Her breath came in measured puffs, mist intertwining with the chill night air, blending with the faint crackle of distant ice shifting beneath the weight of winter's grip. Cradled against her chest, the child was a fragile weight, unnatural in form and presence, yet somehow alive with an unsettling awareness that seemed to pulse beneath its blue-tinged skin. The priestess's hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the heavy burden she bore. The weight of prophecy, the gravity of a future she could neither escape nor fully comprehend. Around them, the forest was silent, save for the occasional snap of a brittle branch or the faint rustle of a restless creature tucked deep within the shadows. Yet between the darkness and the frost, a fragile thread of warmth clung to Thyra, tethering her to the moment, to the child she had saved from the fury of men who could only see a monster. Her path was deliberate, leading away from the village, away from the harsh eyes and whispered curses that had shadowed her for moons. She sought sanctuary, a place where the fragile might find strength, where the flicker of life might be nurtured without judgment. The circle of stones awaited her, a sacred ground steeped in ancient. She wrapped the child tightly in her cloak, the thick wool shielding it from the night's cruel bite. The amulet of Freya lay heavy against her breast, its carved symbol a reminder of the goddess's elusive favor. Thyra's fingers trembled as she adjusted the folds, careful to conceal the infant's unnatural features from the world. The village had cast her out, branded her a witch. Yet here in the wilderness, she was alone with the truth, a truth that whispered of shadows yet to fall. Rising slowly, the priestess began her journey back to a hidden refuge nestled deeper within the wood. The cabin she sought was small and humble, worn by seasons of storm and stillness alike. It belonged to Leif, the blacksmith who had stood by her in the dark days when suspicion threatened to consume her spirit. He was a man of the earth, his hands scarred by fire and iron, his heart steady against the tides of fear that swept through Kattegat. As she approached the cabin, the faint glow of a hearth flickered through the frost-covered window panes. The warmth was a beacon in the cold void, a promise of life amidst the encroaching night. Thyra's steps quickened, urgency threading through her exhaustion. Within these walls, the child might find sanctuary, and she, perhaps, a moment of respite from the relentless weight of prophecy. Leif was there, seated by the fire, his silver hair catching the light like strands of frozen moonbeams. His eyes, sharp and clear despite the years etched upon his face, lifted with a mixture of surprise and cautious hope as Thyra entered. The air smelled of smoke and smelted metal, a comforting scent that spoke of endurance and skill. Without words, Thyra approached, revealing the bundle nestled beneath her cloak. Leif's gaze softened as he recognized the child, the unnatural hues, the two dark eyes. He said nothing, but his hands, though worn and trembling, reached out gently, steadying her as if to share the burden. The flickering firelight danced across their faces, illuminating the lines of worry and determination carved deep in each. The silence stretched between them, a fragile truce woven from shared fear and unspoken understanding. Thyra settled beside Leif, lowering the child onto a thick blanket laid carefully by the hearth. The warmth seeped into the infant's skin, coaxing faint color into the unnatural blue. Leif moved to a worn table, gathering herbs and cloths, his movements deliberate and practiced. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and rough, a balm against the heavy quiet. The child breathes, but the frost in its veins runs deep. We must keep the warmth close, lest the darkness consume it. Thyra nodded, her gaze never leaving the infant's inscrutable face. It is more than frost, she said softly. There is something beyond, something old and watching. Leif's eyes narrowed, reading between the lines of her words. The gods speak in riddles, he replied. But your fear is not without merit. We must be cautious. Together, they tended the child with gentle hands and whispered prayers. Thyra brewed a tea from sacred herbs, mugwort, rowan, and wild thyme, offering sips to calm the infant's restless limbs. The child responded with a fragile coo, a sound that neither resembled newborn cries nor the silence of death. As the hours deepened, the bond between priestess and child grew in quiet moments, a soft breath here, a careful touch there. Thyra found herself studying the subtle details, the faint birthmark shaped like a twisted rune upon the child's wrist, the way it flinched at the scent of iron but not of fire, the peculiar cadence of its breathing that seemed to echo the rhythm of distant tides. In the flickering shadows cast by the hearth, the child's eyes reflected the flames, a pool of darkness reflecting a flicker of something ancient. Thyra's heart tightened. This was no ordinary being. Yet beneath the fear, beneath the dread, there was a fragile spark, an ember of life that refused to be extinguished. Leif reached out, his gnarled fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from the child's forehead. You carry a heavy fate, priestess, he murmured. But perhaps it is not ours to bear alone. Thyra met his gaze, finding in his steady presence a balm for the solitude that had gnawed at her. "I have walked this path alone for long," she admitted. "But now, the burden grows heavier. I fear what is to come." Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, a mourning song that whispered of endings and beginnings intertwined. Yet within the small cabin, the fire burned steady, casting a fragile shield against the night. As dawn approached, real and unreal began to blur. The child stirred, stretching limbs that seemed too long and delicate, fingers curling like ancient talons. Its gaze locked with Thyra's, the silent communication between them growing stronger, a bond forged not by blood, but by the shared burden of a fate neither fully understood. In that quiet space between night and day, the priestess cradled the child close, feeling the faint pulse of life beneath her fingertips. The weight of prophecy still pressed upon her, but within the fragile shelter of warmth and whispered prayers, a seed of hope took root. Not for salvation, perhaps, but for understanding. And as the first pale light filtered through the frost-streaked windows, Thyra allowed herself a moment to breathe, to simply be present with the fragile, terrifying gift she had sworn to protect. Silence embraced them once more, a fragile promise in a world teetering on the edge of shadow. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and sorrow. But for now, in this small refuge beneath the ancient trees, the priestess and the child shared a fragile peace, an uneasy truce in a world turning inexorably toward darkness. The news spread like wildfire across the frozen tundra, carried on the breath of traders, scouts, and wandering hunters who dared venture near Kattegat's shadowed borders. Whispers of the monstrous child's birth had traveled beyond the village walls, outpacing the biting winds and reaching ears hungry for tales of terror and power. What began as fearful murmurs soon grew into a chorus of suspicion and dread that echoed through nearby clans and rival settlements, stretching the threads of unease across a vast and unforgiving land. Within the fragile sanctuary of Leif's cabin, the flickering firelight seemed to shrink under the weight of the growing storm outside. Thyra sat hunched over the small hearth, her fingers restless as they traced the runes on her silver rings, seeking some sign, some fragment of guidance in the ancient symbols. The child lay swaddled in her lap, its blue-tinged skin almost glowing in the dim light, those black, fathomless eyes watching her with a quiet intensity that felt both unsettling and eerily familiar. Hours ago, the sharp crack of a branch underfoot outside had made her heart leap into her throat. She had started, blade half drawn, only to find the familiar form of Leif, his weathered face etched with unease. "They're coming," he had said simply, voice low but steady. "The news has reached the clans. Hunters, scouts, they seek answers. And they do not come with goodwill." Thyra's breath caught in her chest. The fragile shelter they had built was no longer safe. The village's judgment had been harsh, but the judgment of those who knew nothing of the truth could be far worse. She felt the cold knot of fear tighten, a weight she could neither cast off nor ignore. Outside, the forest seemed to hold its breath, the ancient pines swaying as if whispering warnings. The long winter night deepened, stars blinking cold watchfulness through the bare branches. Somewhere, distant howls echoed, wolves, perhaps, or worse. The boundary between the natural world and the realm of shadows felt thin, translucent, as if the very air conspired to remind Thyra of the peril she carried. Leif's voice broke the silence. "You must decide, Thyra. Hide this child, or face the fury that follows. The clans will not stand for this abomination. They will come with axes and fire." She looked down at the infant, those impossible eyes meeting hers, drawing her in with an unspoken command. The creature was no longer just a symbol of destruction, no mere harbinger of doom. It was alive, aware, and, terrifyingly, waiting. "For what?" she murmured. "What does it want?" Leif shook his head. power beyond mortal reckoning. A darkness old, the doors would groan under their pounding. A blade flashed through the gap where the lock had been broken, slicing the air with a promise of violence. Thyra stepped forward, the child wrapped tightly against her chest. She raised her voice, steady despite the fear. "I will not yield what the gods have set before me." A chilling silence met her words, as if even the cold night hesitated. The men outside muttered in frustration, their impatience brimming. "Open this door, priestess. There is no mercy for the cursed." Thyra's eyes darted to the small dagger at her belt, the ritual blade carved with runes meant to protect and to sever. Her fingers brushed its hilt, feeling the cold steel beneath her skin. She knew the choice before her: surrender the child to a fate of blood and fire, or fight and become the harbinger of the very darkness they feared. Suddenly, a voice rang out from the shadows beyond the door, a voice rough and familiar. "Stand down." The men paused, the tension momentarily broken by the arrival of Leaf, stepping into the moonlight with a weathered hammer clenched in one hand. His presence was a shield, a reminder that the priestess was not alone. "Let her speak," Leaf commanded, voice steady and resolute. "The gods have not abandoned this land yet." Bjorn's name was whispered among the men, curses trailing behind it like smoke. The warrior was nowhere to be seen, but his shadow loomed large in their minds, a cruel reminder of the violence they sought to unleash. Thyra stepped back into the dim light, her voice rising with a fierce resolve. "This child is not a curse, but a warning. What comes after will test all of us. Cast aside your fear and listen, for the true monster is not what you see." Murmurs stirred among the men, skepticism etched deep in their faces. The frozen wind carried their doubt like shards of ice. Yet beneath their hardened exteriors, a flicker of uncertainty took root. The stories they had heard, the tales of shadows moving beyond the forest's edge, perhaps there was truth in the priestess's words. Still, the threat was palpable. The clans, watching from the periphery, had sent envoys, men skilled in tracking, in war, in the harsh art of survival. Their arrival was no accident, no mere curiosity. It was a summons to judgment. As dawn's first light bled into the sky, the cabin's fragile sanctuary grew heavy with unspoken threats. The child stirred, those black eyes reflecting the rising sun's pale glow, as if welcoming the new day's challenges. Thyra's hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the crushing weight of responsibility. She was caught between the love for the fragile life in her arms and the unyielding reality of a world that would never accept it. The question haunted her: could she protect the child against a world that sought to destroy it? Or would the darkness that whispered through the icy winds claim them all? Outside, the forest held its secrets close, the ancient stones watching silently as fate's needle sewed threads of war and sorrow into the fabric of Kattegat's soul. In this fragile moment, the priestess understood with terrible clarity that the true battle was only beginning, and that survival demanded sacrifices far greater than she had imagined. The winds howled again, carrying voices from the distance, clans gathering beyond the tree-line, their war cries swallowed by the heavy snow. The age of shadows was dawning, and there was no turning back. The night pressed down like a suffocating shroud as the first murmurs of the approaching clans echoed through the frozen forest. The air hung heavy with cold and dread, each gust carrying the faint scent of smoke and steel, signaling the arrival of those who would judge Thyra and the child she guarded. The flickering light from the cabin's hearth cast long shadows against the rough timber walls, shadows that seemed to dance with the restless fear gripping the priestess's heart. Inside, Thyra sat motionless, the infant cradled in her arms, a fragile bundle of unnatural flesh and piercing black eyes that seemed to absorb the flickering firelight and return it with an unsettling stillness. Her emerald gaze, once fierce and resolute, now flickered with exhaustion and an aching uncertainty. Each breath she took was shallow, weighed down by the crushing knowledge that the sanctuary she had sought was about to be shattered. Leif stood near the hearth, his knuckles white as he gripped the haft of his hammer. His eyes, sharp and wary, flicked toward the window, where the dark shapes of figures moved amid the skeletal trees. Even his seasoned heart faltered beneath the growing storm. "They come with fire and fury," he muttered, voice rough as gravel. "And they bring no mercy for what they do not understand." Thyra's hands tightened around the child's small form, fingers curling protectively, as if she could shield it from the cold world beyond with sheer will. "This child is not what they fear," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread against the pressing silence. "It is a messenger, a warning, but they will see only a monster." The cabin's doors splintered suddenly, a brutal sound that shattered the fragile calm like a thunderclap. The heavy-booted footsteps of men flooded inside, carrying with them the bitter scent of iron and vengeance. Torches flared in the hands of the invaders, their flames licking hungrily at the walls, casting the room into a harsh glow of accusation and violence. Bjorn's shadow fell into the doorway, as imposing and cruel as the winter itself. His eyes, dark and burning with rage, locked onto Thyra's with a venomous intensity. The once mighty warrior, whose scars spoke of countless battles, now carried a fury born of fear and pride wounded deeper than any blade could reach. "You defy the will of the gods," he spat, voice low and menacing. "You bring this abomination into the world and hide it from those who must judge." Thyra met his gaze unflinchingly, the weight of her burden crystallizing into a fierce resolve. "I defy only those who cannot see beyond their fear, Bjorn. This child is not the curse you believe it to be. It carries a message, one you refuse to hear." Bjorn's hand drifted to the hilt of his sword, fingers tightening in anticipation of violence. "Words are no shield against what you have unleashed. We came with fire and axe to burn out the darkness you have borne. Surrender the child, or we will take it by force." The men behind him shifted, the clatter of weapons filling the space with a threatening rhythm. Faces once familiar now seemed twisted by suspicion, hatred, and the cold logic of survival. The villagers' rage, long simmering beneath brittle civility, now threatened to spill over into bloodshed. Leif stepped forward, voice steady but edged with warning. "You will not find what you seek with steel. The gods speak through this priestess, and her words carry weight beyond mortal wrath." Bjorn's eyes narrowed, but the flicker of hesitation was quickly swallowed by fury. "Your loyalty is misplaced, old man. This which has led us astray." Thyra rose slowly, the child pressing against her chest. "There is a darkness coming beyond what you can imagine," she said, voice steady despite the storm raging within. "This child is but a herald. Judge us all, if you must, but know that what you fear is only the beginning." Bjorn laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed through the cabin. "Then let the gods decide." His sword flashed suddenly, a blur of cold steel aimed at the priestess. But before the blade could fall, a sharp cry cut through the chaos, a voice neither human nor wholly other. The child in Thyra's arms stirred, fingers flexing like talons, eyes glowing faintly with an eerie light that sent a ripple of unease through all who beheld it. "Stop," the voice said, low and resonant, filling the room with a weight that seemed to press down upon the very air. Every man froze, caught between disbelief and terror. Thyra's heart pounded as she clenched the child tighter. "You see now," she whispered, "it is not a monster born to destroy. There is a greater fate at hand." Bjorn's expression flickered, torn between rage and a dawning fear that mirrored her own. His sword wavered, the violence in his eyes replaced momentarily by uncertainty. "Tell us," Leif urged, stepping forward. "What is this message? What must we know to survive what comes?" The child's gaze swept across the room, black eyes shimmering with knowledge older than the mountains themselves. The age of darkness begins not with my birth, but with the fall of as the first light bled through the frost-streaked windows, Thyra cradled the child close. Her eyes, once sharp and searching, now reflected a profound sorrow and a fierce determination. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with sacrifice and sorrow, but she would face it with the strength of a priestess chosen by the gods and bound by the weight of prophecy. In the quiet aftermath of confrontation, the fragile truce held, for now. The true darkness was yet to come, but in the hearts of those who dared to listen, a seed of understanding had been planted. The age of shadows was dawning, and Thyra's soul bore the first mark of its coming. The long hours that followed were filled with uneasy exchanges. The warriors who had stormed the cabin lingered, their weapons sheathed but their gazes wary. The child, this eerie enigma, rested quietly against Thyra's chest, its unnatural features softened by the warmth of the fire. Bjorn remained a looming presence, his anger subdued but simmering beneath the surface like embers awaiting a gust of wind. He paced the small room, his thoughts as tangled as the scars on his sunburnt skin. Thyra, sensing the fragile threads of possibility, sought to bridge the widening gulf between fear and reason. "We cannot fight what is destined," she said softly, "but we can choose how we face it, together or divided." Leaf nodded, his eyes tired but resolute. The clans must hear this. They must prepare, not for war among themselves, but for the true battle that lies ahead. Bjorn's gaze hardened. "And what of our people? What protection do we have from a darkness born of gods and shadows?" Thyra's voice was steady, a quiet fire burning beneath the weight of prophecy. "Protection lies in knowledge, in unity. The gods have spoken through me, but their message is a warning, not a sentence. We must listen and learn." The dawn grew pale outside, the frost melting slowly beneath the sun's weak touch. The village of Kattegat, caught between the harsh bite of winter and the uncertain dawn of a new age, stood at the crossroads of fate. And within its heart, a priestess held a child not born of this world, clutching the fragile hope that even the darkest night can give way to light. The days that followed were a tumult of preparation and whispered counsel. The clans convened beneath the towering oaks, voices low but urgent as they wrestled with the priestess's warnings and the chilling words of the child. Old grudges softened in the face of a threat no sword could slay, and a fragile alliance seemed to take root amid the snowdrifts and shadows. Yet, beneath the tentative peace, the true battle raged, not only against the darkness looming beyond the horizon, but within the hearts of those who dared to hope. Thyra, once cast out and scorned, now stood as a beacon amid the gathering storm. Her hands, stained with blood and burden, were steady with newfound purpose. The child nestled against her, silent yet ever watchful, a reminder that destiny was a path woven with both sorrow and strength. The future was uncertain, the shadows deep and restless. But for the first time in many moons, the people of Kattegat dared to dream of dawn beyond the long winter. And the gods, silent no longer, watched as a new chapter began, etched in frost and fire, shadow and light. The long night had given way to an uneasy dawn, a pale light spilling over the snow-covered land like a fragile promise. Inside the modest hall where the clans had gathered, the air was thick with exhaustion and cautious hope. Faces once hardened by suspicion now bore traces of tentative understanding. The flickering torches along the walls cast dancing shadows, as if the very spirits of the old gods were watching this fragile moment, waiting to see if the people of Kattegat could choose a different path. Thyra sat near the hearth, the weight of the child still resting lightly but heavily in her arms. The infant's black eyes, so deep and unknowable, were calm now, reflecting the warm glow of the fire. Around her, the murmurs of the elders and warriors carried a low hum of debate, their voices tentative, seeking meaning in the priestess's words and the child's cryptic proclamations. Bjorn sat across the room, his usual ferocity tempered, his gaze softer yet burdened. The fury that had once burned like wildfire in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a shadow of doubt and a flicker of something like regret. His hand rested on the hilt of his sword, but there was no longer a readiness to draw it. Leif, ever the steady presence, leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom. The gods have spoken through Thyra and through the child. We cannot deny the truth any longer. The path before us is dark, but it is ours to walk. There was a pause, a breath hanging between hope and fear, before one of the elder men, a grizzled warrior with scars mapping a lifetime of battle, stepped forward. His voice was rough but resolute. Then we must stand together. For the sake of our people, for the sake of the future. A quiet murmur of agreement spread through the gathered crowd. The walls that had divided them, the fear, the anger, the suspicion, began to crumble beneath the weight of this shared resolve. Thyra's heart ached as she looked at the faces around her. The same people who had cast her out, branded her a witch and a bringer of doom, now looked upon her with a fragile trust. It was not the acceptance she had once dreamed of, but it was enough, a beginning. Bjorn rose slowly, stepping toward her with a tentative purpose. His voice, when it came, was low and rough, but there was no venom in it now. "Priestess," he said, his eyes searching hers, "I was blind to what I feared. Your words and your courage have shown me a path I had not seen. For that, I owe you my thanks." Thyra's emerald eyes met his, reading the complex mixture of remorse and hope within. The warrior who had once been her fiercest adversary now stood humbled before her, not as an enemy, but as a man recognizing the weight of truth. She inclined her head slightly, her voice gentle but firm. "We all walk through shadow and light, Bjorn. It is not weakness to face what we fear, but strength to choose what we will become." Around them, the murmurs grew, the tension easing as hope took root. The clans, once fractured by fear, now found themselves united by a fragile but growing faith in a future where darkness did not dictate their fate. In the quiet that followed, a woman stepped forward, a healer from a neighboring village, known for her kindness and wisdom. She approached Thyra with a soft smile, placing a hand gently on the priestess's shoulder. "Your strength has saved more than just a child," she said warmly. "You have saved us all from ourselves." Thyra's breath caught at the unexpected warmth. For so long, she had carried the weight of rejection and loneliness like a shroud. Now, in this moment, the fragile thread of community began to weave back around her. The child stirred, its small fingers curling softly around Thyra's thumb. The black eyes lifted to meet hers with an unsettling but calm intelligence. It was as if, in that gaze, the silent promise of the future was held, a future forged not by fate alone, but by the choices of those brave enough to embrace it. Bjorn's voice broke the silence once more. "What is to be done now?" he asked, his tone carrying the weight of responsibility. Leif stepped forward, rubbing his hands together thoughtfully. "We prepare. We learn. We watch. The darkness will come, as the child has said, but we will not face it divided or unready." The gathered clans nodded in solemn agreement. The old grudges would not vanish overnight, but the seeds of alliance had been planted in blood and truth. Thyra looked down at the infant, the impossible child that had been the catalyst for this reckoning. Its blue-tinged skin seemed to hold the coldness of winter itself, but in that coldness, a spark had been kindled, a spark of life, of hope, of something beyond the fear that had defined so many moons. She whispered softly, the words both a prayer and a vow. "You are not alone. Not now. Together, we will face what is to come." Outside, the wind stirred, carrying the scent of pine and snow, whispering through the ancient forest like a song of endings and beginnings. The sun climbed higher, melting the frost from the branches and casting the world in a light both harsh and beautiful. In that moment, Thyra, the priestess once shunned and branded a bearer of ill omen, found her place among the people not through ease or forgiveness, but through steadfast commitment and undeniable truth. The child she had cradled in her arms, the one who had spoken in voices ancient and ominous, was no longer seen as a curse but as a symbol of something far greater, a turning point, a harbinger of a new era. In the quiet moments beneath the towering pines, when the wind whispered through the branches like the murmurs of old gods, the villagers gathered in circles once divided by mistrust. Fires burned brighter, and voices rose in shared song and prayer to Freya and the pantheon that watched over them, not out of fear, but with renewed faith. The old rites, once rigid and unyielding, softened, adapted to the truths revealed by the priestess's visions and the child's cryptic warnings. Bjorn, the warrior whose rage had once threatened to ignite the village in flames, bore the weight of his past with a quieter strength. The scars on his skin remained, but the fire in his eyes was tempered by wisdom and humility. He walked among the people not as a tyrant, but as a guardian, a man reshaped by loss and revelation. His hand, once quick to draw a sword, now rested often upon the shoulders of those younger than he, guiding them with tales of hard-earned lessons and the cost of pride. Sigrid, whose ordeal had birthed the unsettling child, found a different path as well. Freed from the shadow cast by her husband's cruelty and the village's suspicion, she embraced a role that few could have imagined for her, healer and keeper of stories. Her hands, once trembling with fear and pain, now moved with gentle certainty as she tended to the wounds of both body and spirit. The amulet of fertility that had once been hidden beneath her tunic became a talisman of new life and hope, a bridge between the old fears and new beginnings. Leif, the old blacksmith known as Hands of Fire, remained a quiet pillar of strength. His age deepened, but so did his purpose. His forge, ever glowing with molten iron and the scent of burning wood, became a place not only of crafting weapons and tools, but of forging bonds. Those who came seeking his counsel left with more than sharpened steel. They carried the tempered spirit of a man who had seen darkness and chosen light. Thyra's life unfolded like a slow-burning flame, steady, persistent, and resolute. Her once fierce gaze softened with time, not from surrender, but from the burden of understanding the fragile balance between fate and free will. The runes she wore etched in silver on her fingers remained, each symbol a prayer for guidance and protection, but now they also bore the marks of community, scratches and worn edges from the many hands that had reached to her in desperation and hope. The child, whose name was whispered in reverence and silent awe, grew under Thyra's watchful eyes. It was not the monster of the old fears, but something more complex, a being straddling the line between worlds, carrying the memory of darkness and the seed of something yet to be born. Its eyes, once black pools of unknowable depth, held now a glimmer of human warmth, a bridge between shadow and light. The villagers learned to look beyond the surface, to hear the unspoken stories carried in silence and gaze, finding strength in acceptance rather than division. Children grew up with tales not only of gods and heroes, but of the priestess who dared to embrace the unknown, and the child who reminded them that destiny was not fixed but forged in the fires of choice and courage. One bitter winter's evening, as the wind howled like a restless spirit outside the sturdy walls of the mead hall, Thyra stood by the fire with Bjorn at her side. The flickering flames cast long shadows, dancing against the timbered walls and the faces of those gathered, a community bound by blood, fear, hope, and the slow healing of old wounds. Bjorn's voice, usually rough and commanding, held a rare softness as he spoke. The road ahead will always be dark, but together, we hold the lantern that keeps the shadows at bay. Thyra nodded, her gaze resting on the child, now sitting quietly near the hearth, watching with eyes that bore the wisdom of ages. "The gods have shown us the beginning," she said, "but the story is ours to write." Outside, the snow fell gently, blanketing the land in white silence, a canvas for new paths, new choices. In the days that followed, a quiet transformation took root. The ancient circle of stones, once a place where darkness had been confronted with sacrifice, became a sanctuary of remembrance and renewal. The villagers gathered there to honor the cycles of life and death, of shadow and light, weaving old customs with new understanding. Thyra's voice, once a lonely whisper in the wind, now carried across the fields and forests, a steady call to courage and compassion. Her prayers to Freya were no longer cries of desperation, but hymns of hope, sung with a tribe united by shared fate. And though the shadow of the future still lingered, an ever-present reminder of the fragile balance between light and dark, the people of Kattegat faced it not with fear, but with open hearts. The monster that had been foretold was never truly what they feared. It was a mirror held up to their own souls, a reflection of what lay hidden in the depths, waiting to be acknowledged and transformed. As the seasons turned and the years marched onward, the legacy of that winter endured, not in tales of horror, but in the quiet strength of a village reborn, in the hands joined across divides, and in the eyes of a child who carried the dawn in their gaze. Thyra, once a priestess abandoned, became a guardian of that hope, a living testament to the power of acceptance in the face of darkness. The gods watched silently, their ancient eyes resting upon a land forever changed, as a new chapter unfolded beneath the endless sky. And somewhere, in the deepest shadows beyond the forest's edge, a whisper stirred, a reminder that the age of darkness was not an end, but a beginning, a test of the heart's true strength. For in the dance of shadow and light, every ending births a new dawn. The cold wind whispered through the towering pines as the village of Kattegat settled into a quiet winter evening. Fires flickered behind frosted windows, casting wavering shadows on timbered walls. Outside, the snow lay heavy, muffling footsteps and softening the edges of a world forever changed. Inside one mead hall, the murmurs of kin and clansfolk blended with the crackle of burning wood, an uneasy peace settling over those who had once stood divided by fear and suspicion. Thyra Ravensdottir sat near the hearth, the child nestled gently in her lap. The infant's dark eyes, once pools of unknowable dread, now held a strange warmth, an ember of humanity flickering beneath the cold blue skin. Around them, the faces of the village reflected countless stories, of pain, of redemption, of fragile hope born from sorrow. The years had not erased the scars left by the monstrous birth or the darkness that had followed, but they had softened the edges, weaving those moments into a tapestry of survival and resilience. Bjorn, whose rage had once threatened to consume all, now spoke with a quiet gravity. His voice, weathered like the iron he once wielded so fiercely, carried the weight of hard-earned wisdom. The path ahead is long, and the shadows will not easily lift. But together, we have strength beyond any blade or shield. Thyra's gaze lingered on the child, feeling the steady rise and fall of its fragile breath. The weight of prophecy still pressed upon her, but no longer as a burden meant to isolate. It was a mantle shared by many, by a community worn thin by hardship, but bound anew by understanding. "We cannot undo what has come before," she said softly, "but we can choose how to walk forward. In unity, even the darkest winter yields to spring." Leaf, Hands of Fire, Gunson, the steadfast blacksmith whose life had intertwined with theirs in unexpected ways, nodded from across the room. His eyes, bright despite the years, held a glimmer of hope. The gods may speak in riddles, but the message is clear. Survival demands more than swords. It requires hearts willing to face fear and change. Outside, the wind carried the faint howls of wool. Thyra's eyes traced the rune-etched rings on her fingers, each symbol a prayer etched in silver and spirit. They bore the marks of long nights spent in contemplation, of battles waged both within and without. Now, those runes carried a new meaning, one of acceptance, of the delicate balance between fate decreed and freedom chosen. She whispered a prayer to Freya, the goddess who had watched over her through joy and suffering. The words were simple, a soft invocation to the goddess of love, war, and destiny. Guide us through the shadowed path. Teach us to see beyond fear. Let the light we carry be stronger than the darkness that waits. Leif's voice broke the quiet as he began to tend the forge once more, the comforting rhythm of hammer on anvil a steady heartbeat against the silence. We build not just weapons, but futures, he said. And futures are forged in the fires of understanding and sacrifice. Bjorn's gaze drifted to the window where the moon climbed slowly, casting pale light over the snowy landscape. The world we knew is changing, he murmured. But change is neither friend nor foe. It is the endless tide that shapes us all. Thyra nodded, her thoughts turning to the many faces she had seen. Those who had feared her, those who had doubted, those who had stood with her. In their eyes, she found reflections of her own struggle, the yearning for safety, for meaning, for a place in a world that seemed to shift beneath their feet. She thought of Sigrid, whose fragile life had been the vessel for this impossible child. The young woman's journey from fear to healing was a testament to the strength found in vulnerability. Her hands, once trembling, now bore the gentle touch of a healer, weaving stories and remedies that mended more than flesh. The village, once fractured, now pulsed with cautious life. Children laughed beneath the ancient trees, their voices rising like fragile songs in the cold air. The old gods, once silent, seemed to stir in the rustling leaves and shifting stars, watching, waiting. Thyra closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the moment. She had walked through darkness deeper than the longest winter night, faced monsters born not only of flesh but fear. And yet, here she stood, not shattered but tempered, a beacon amidst the shadows. Her heart echoed a simple truth: darkness is not the end. It is the space where light is most needed, where courage is kindled, where the future can be shaped by those brave enough to face the unknown. She opened her eyes, green and piercing as ever, and looked upon the faces gathered, worn but unbroken. The child in her arms stirred once more, a soft sound breaking the silence. A breath, a heartbeat, a new beginning. Outside, the wind carried the song of the forest, a haunting melody woven with the promise of dawn. The age of shadows was dawning, yes, but it was also the age of resilience, of new paths forged in the crucible of fear and hope intertwined. And so, beneath the ancient sky, amidst firelight and whispered prayers, they chose to stand together, guardians of a fragile peace, bearers of a legacy not of monsters and doom, but of enduring light. For in the dance between shadow and flame, it is not fate alone that decides, but the strength to rise when darkness falls. If these echoes from the past stirred something within, if the weight of prophecy and the courage to face it touched your spirit, then join us. Walk with us through the frost and flame of Viking lore, where every story holds a lesson, and every dawn carries the promise of a new journey. Subscribe, and together we will uncover the mysteries etched in the stones and whispered by the winds. Share where you listen, from frozen fjords to distant cities, so the tales of Thyra and her people may find new ears and hearts. Remember, sometimes the greatest monsters we face are the fears we refuse to understand. But through understanding, even the darkest nights yield to dawn.
If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.